2 years ago, my SO and I found the perfect place to rent. It was a small tract of fabricated homes, and the neighbourhood was nice. It was quiet, which for two college seniors wanting out of the noisy dorms was honestly just heaven. Now, because this was in Arizona, and it was prefab houses, most of the folks that lived in our neighbourhood were 60 or older, save a few. To our left, Sandra and David, an awesome couple in their early 60s, both retired postal workers. They spent summers in Maine and winters here. To our right, Carol, a 40-something who supposedly owned her own home business. She actually looked like she perpetually was sucking a lemon, and she was just always a little bit off. At first, she would occasionally join my SO for a smoke on the porch, or if we barbecued with Dave or Sandy, we would invite her over. To say that she was awkward too was putting it lightly. We suspected, in fact, that maybe she was on the spectrum or something. We'd just be eating, and she would describe how her mother died a slow, agonizing death when a tumour in her throat burst. Or there was this time where she described in great detail her latest yeast infection. I kid you not. Anyway, sometimes I would work out on my porch, and I had a small bench with a bar and some weights and whatnot, and one day I'm lifting when I almost dropped the bar on my neck, because leaning over me was Carol. She then mumbled, "I could have snapped your neck like a twig." And I sat up and I said, "Pardon?" And she said, "I said you could have really hurt yourself." I doubted at the time what I had heard, chalking it up to not hearing her correctly, but she had this really sinister smirk on her face. After that, I just tried my best to ignore her. However, I had told my SO my suspicions that maybe old Carol was a bit insane. I come home from class one evening and my SO and Carol are on the porch. I went inside because I was coming down with something, and honestly, I just wanted to go to bed. So my SO comes in and tells me that she's going to a job. She works nights at a dispatcher for the campus police. I'm completely out of it though, so she kisses me goodnight, says that she'll lock up the house and will see me in the morning. Around 1 a.m, I wake up covered in sweat, and I go to get a glass of water and drink it down. I see my SO, or who I assume is my SO, on the couch, and I'm so out of it that I just crawl back into bed and fall asleep. The next morning, I wake up and my SO comes to the door telling me that work was just crazy. I say to her, "Wait, you weren't at work. You were here, right?" She looks at me funny, and I immediately get a sick feeling in my gut. A fever or no fever, I know that I saw someone on that couch that night. My SO writes it off as just a fever dream, and the house was locked up and whatnot. I forget about it, and life goes on. Graduation is approaching, and things with my side of the family, well, specifically my egg donor, go badly. A long story. SO was offered a job back in her home state of NYC, so we give notice to our landlord and we let Sandy and Dave know, and one night we tell Carol too. She blinks at us and then gets up and heads over to her house, not saying a word, and we just brush it off as just weird Carol again. That night we're asleep when I hear creaking coming from the living area. I sit up, and now SO hears it too, and she grabs my arm and I grab the metal bat under my bed. I ask who's there and whack the door, and there's some thuds. And thank God it was locked. My SO dials 911. Meanwhile, I'm watching as someone begins recreating the door scene from The fucking Shining, except whoever was doing it was using a small hatchet this time. But they're still making progress on the door as it was pretty much hollow, and the 6 minutes it took for the police to get there, man, it just felt like a lifetime. I can now see the hatchet's tip in the door, and suddenly we hear the cops tell someone to put their weapon down. I had no idea who it was until we were let out of the place, and on the couch in cuffs is Carol. We learned after that she had apparently been in and out of jail for a long time, and supposedly she just went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs from long-term use of meth. She was arrested and charged with breaking and entering and destruction of property, and they tried to get her on attempted assault, but she made a plea deal that included some kind of psychiatric treatment or something. Now, I never could prove that she was in my place that day that I was sick, but I'm sure that it was her. And as we were moving, I was messing around with our storage space, and there was a really small crawl space under the home. But we had never used it, and honestly, I pretty much forgot about it. Curious, I crawled around underneath the house and saw that if you kicked hard enough, you could get to the screen that led to the outside of it easily. And who knows just how many times she might have been in our place or under the house listening to us or something. We still keep in touch with Sandy and Dave. The unit Carol rented was actually sold, and they haven't seen her since she was carted off to jail. And thankfully, we're now thousands of miles away, and we never have to see her again. I rent a small house with my partner, and it actually used to be a family cottage in my landlord's family that he converted to a regular rental home. We've lived here for about 2 years, I think now, with our 2 adult cats too. And since we moved in, a few minor things have happened. So it started as a sound or two coming from upstairs when no one else was in the house. The cats were on the couch or downstairs with us, and sometimes it was footsteps, twice it was scratches against the floor, and it happened maybe 4 or 5 times. But recently, things have just gotten a little bit worse. So, both of us have actually been touched by something. My partner and I have both felt something brush our ankles, like an affectionate cat, but both cats were asleep on the bed. Whatever it is, it seems to concentrate on me more than my partner too. Once it gently grabbed my elbow. It's brushed up against me on 2 additional occasions, once in the bedroom and once while I was cooking. Recently too, I've been experiencing these really weird hallucination kind of things. Kind of like when you're in that pre-sleep stage or just about to head off to sleep. These visions are kind of in a pre-conscious state, if you catch my drift. This has never happened to me before, mind you, and I believe that whatever it is has showed its face through these things. It's always pale, and it has an unsettling smile, and it looks vaguely human, but not quite. Last week, one of the rosaries on my bedpost broke, and yesterday morning, it threw a shoe off the radiator while it was warming. And that was the first time that I've seen something physical like that. Then, last night, it jabbed me in the ribs really hard while I was washing dishes, and it growled at me on the stairs going up to the bedroom. This morning, it knocked 3 times, like knuckles on wood, and it was so loud that it actually woke me up. Now, I've seen and heard things before, and I'm open to knowing what's around me, but I don't communicate with this thing. This thing clearly wants my acknowledgement too, but given its level of perseverance, I'm not inclined to give it what it wants. Also, I was lying awake next to my partner 2 nights ago, and she kept mumbling in her sleep. At one point, the mumbling stopped, and she just tapped my hand with her finger, and a while later she was talking in her sleep again, and I couldn't exactly hear what she said. I woke her up though, and she told me that she was seeing things in her sleep. She said that she tapped me because she couldn't move and felt like she was being held in place. The next morning, she had a single small scratch on her abdomen. She doesn't know where it came from, and to be honest, it looks pretty fresh. I don't know what to do, and if you guys have any suggestions, I'm all ears. I recently ran into an old co-worker from our time that we worked at the sandwich shop in the truck stop. We chatted for a while before he had to leave, but I started thinking about my stint at that place, and specifically, the creepy sandwich guy. In college, I worked some overnights at that truck stop. It was a pretty safe place in a smaller town, and there had only been 3 incidents in the 4 years the place had been open before I got hired. One trucker got robbed, apparently, and one group of ladies arrested for, well, servicing the truckers, if you catch my drift, and 1 OD. I was never really worried, even though my co-worker seemed a little concerned that I was a young girl working overnights at a truck stop when there was only 1 other employee in the whole place. Usually, though, it was just really slow, and most of the time I'd get 3 or 4 truckers come in within the first hour. A couple of people coming in with the munchies and ordered 3 dozen cookies one time, but usually it was maybe 1 or 2 hours between things. So I'd spend about 3 hours just cleaning ovens, finishing dishes, deep cleaning the lobby, that kind of thing, and then I'd go to spend whatever time between customers just doing homework. The overnight boss on the other side, the gas station side, was cool as long as everything was cleaned and tempered regularly. A few weeks before I inevitably left this place, a guy came in about 20 minutes before my shift was over, so it was about 5 a.m. by this point. But my coworker had arrived early, so he could fill out some paperwork that he had to get done, so he was sitting in the back office already, and I started making this customer sandwich, making chit-chat like usual. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and he told me that it was driving from New York to Wisconsin, asked me a little bit about how my night had been, and nothing crazy. I wrapped up his sub, rang it up, and threw in a small discount for him since he seemed nice, and I was just happy I was getting ready to go home for a few hours of sleep before I headed to campus. When I went to take his change, though, things just went really wrong. He dropped the coins in my hand, but suddenly he had his grip tight around my wrist, and the next thing I knew, I'm on the other side of the counter on the floor. He'd yanked me across the counter and still had a tight grip on my wrist, and thank God my coworker was there. And the manager on the other side had slipped into the bathroom, so to this guy's knowledge, I was the only one there for that moment. But my coworker, while filling out his papers, was looking at the cameras and had seen everything. He was out of the back in just seconds after I hit the ground, and before I really knew what was going on, he had chased the guy outside. He didn't pursue him far, afraid that someone else was nearby who would come after me, so he ran back inside, locked the door to our side of the store, and shouted for the manager to call the police. The cops came and they searched the area and watched the security videos, but nothing ever really came from it. The guy just disappeared and I never heard anything about him. After that, though, I put in my 2 weeks' notice the following day after my nerves had calmed down, and I was switched around so I worked during the day around my classes for my last few days. And they made it a policy that 2 people were to be working both sides of the truck stop on overnights from that point on. I still live about a half an hour from there, I think, and honestly, I haven't gone back since my last day just because that memory is still in my mind, almost 8 years later. So there was this guy in my high school that was actually a really funny dude, pretty popular, and almost everyone got along with. He didn't bully anyone that I can recall anyway, and it was impossible not to laugh when he was around. He was a genuinely goofy guy, the class clown type. Now, he would say hi to me to strike up conversation and even compliment me sometimes. And being an awkward teenage girl in an extremely cringeworthy emo phase, I was pretty flattered. I wasn't used to getting attention like that, so it was nice to have a guy around the school that would just randomly say, "You look really cute today." I wasn't interested in him romantically at all, though, but he was more of just a funny acquaintance that made me smile every once in a while. He added me on Facebook, like he did with almost all of the kids in his grade, and the grade below his too. After a while, he asked if I wanted to hang out with him after school, and I contemplated it, but there was a faint voice in the back of my head saying that it probably wasn't a good idea. Nothing really screaming danger, but something in my gut was just telling me to be wary. So I just never took him up on his offers, even if other people were around. He also asked my best friend to hang out after school, but she also never accepted, and we would talk about how weird it was that he would ask us separately to hang out with him after school, since we weren't the type of girls that he was known to date. And we both agreed that we just really would rather not. Anyway, time passed, life went on, and I just completely forgot about the guy. That is, until about a week ago when one of my friends shared an article about a bar in the next town over that was under scrutiny for supposedly aiding predators who hunted there, or something to that effect. I can't remember exactly what the article said because I was more focused on something else in the article. That guy that I went to school with is now in prison for raping 2 women, and that bar was apparently his hunting ground. But word around my hometown is that they weren't his only 2 victims too, just the 2 that got justice. Back when I was a young girl, after a long day at school, I had the usual routine of watching some TV until my friends could play outside. But one day, as I was watching TV, I grabbed for the remote to change the channel, but it was not where I left it. I was the only one home, so I knew something else must have moved it. And after that, the remote, as well as other objects, just began to relocate on a regular basis. And my parents actually started to blame me. I tried to tell them several times about how the remote was being hidden as if it was some child playing a game with me or something, but they figured that I was just wanting attention. Since our house was known as the yelling house on our block due to how much my parents fought, my parents figured that this was simply my way of acting out because everyone knew my home life was troubled. But this all changed when my dad was watching a movie late one night in the living room by himself. So he had all the lights off in the house, and when he reached for the remote in the low light conditions, he found that it had vanished too. Scanning the room, he spotted the remote several feet away from the telephone in the hallway. Annoyed, he stood up to retrieve the remote, but then stopped halfway across the room and dropped his drink when he saw the unmistakable shape of a woman standing in the kitchen. He immediately called for my mum to get him his bat so that he could remove this intruder from our house. And as all of this was happening in the front of the house, back in my bedroom, I awoke with an uneasy feeling in my body. I began to approach my door to see what was wrong, and I heard the distinct sound of a woman crying. I figured it was my mum crying again after her and my dad had a fight, so I opened the door to investigate, and I remember going to step out of my bedroom when my mum quietly stopped me. I looked up and saw that she hadn't been crying at all. Well, we stood together in the silence as my father, baseball bat in hand, stalked towards this crazy lady who had broken into our house. He walked into the kitchen, and then we heard the sound of the bat. But it wasn't the sound of a bat striking anyone. It was the sound of the bat being dropped to the floor. My father emerged from the kitchen moments later, looking extremely pale. Obviously shaken, he mumbled to us something about how the lady had walked through the wall next to the garage and just disappeared. Even though the weeping woman was clear to my father and I, my mum claimed to have never seen a lady. After that first night, the weeping lady would appear to us regularly too. It was always with the same actions as well. She would stand at our sink for a long while, then, crying, she would just walk across the room and vanish into our wall adjacent to the garage. Since the issue with the objects being relocated began around the same time these appearances started, we assumed it was her moving the items and would even scold her for it on occasion. Eventually, we got tired of the cycle the weeping lady held to, and we hung a curtain up to cover the entryway into the kitchen to just give us all some privacy. Something interesting to note too is that I remember that she would appear looking very different at times. But most times she wore a black Victorian-style dress and would be crying into a piece of cloth clutched into her hand. Other times she wore a white flowing nightgown with a lengthy silk robe, appearing as if she was standing in a gentle breeze or something. When she was dressed in her black clothing, she almost seemed solid and her tears came quietly. While she was in her white clothing, she looked more transparent and her tears were quite loud. Her weeping would be so loud at times, in fact, that neighbours would wonder the following day if my parents had been fighting again. It was the type of crying that would make anyone hearing it just feel the sensation of extreme pain and loss. And, unfortunately, no matter what we tried, she would never acknowledge my presence. To this day, I don't know what happened to her, and most people don't believe me when I tell them, but it would have been great if we had seen some sort of other reaction, but I found that most of the things that lived in that house were unaware of any other paranormal presence aside from their own. Most people would refuse to live in a house like this, but keep in mind, we didn't stay here by choice. My family had very little income, and it wasn't in any way realistic for us to be able to pack up and just move, especially when the reason for the move was it's haunted. Little did I know, though, that my experiences at that house would set the stage for a lifetime of encounters with all sorts of just weird paranormal stuff. I'll stop here for now, though, because this is already getting a bit long. My friend has a rescue dog named Indy, and it's the goofiest thing ever. It never runs out of energy and would never hurt someone on purpose. A really good boy, but just way too much energy. He's a German Shepherd Red Heeler mix, and I've never seen him angry. And coming from my friend, the following story has scared me more than any other that I've heard. So she lived in an apartment next to a park, and she likes to walk at night because of insomnia, something that she only felt safe doing with her dog at her side and sticking to the lit sidewalk. They were just ambling along, enjoying the night like usual, when with no warning, all of Indy's hair stands on it, hackles raised, and he just looks and sounds ready to kill, but she can't tell why. She's trying to calm him down when a movement catches her eye, and suddenly there's a guy just barreling through the park straight at them about 100 feet away. He's trying to go so fast that he's almost falling forward, but he wasn't yelling or making noise like he needed help or anything. Indy quickly yanked the leash and ran as fast as he could, dragging my friend behind him. The man is still following and still making no sounds too. They got to the apartment building, and the moment she unlocked the door, Indy slammed it open and she shut it behind her. And the man was suddenly absolutely nowhere to be seen. But Indy was still trying to drag her into the apartment, and when they got into their apartment, he still wouldn't calm down, and he just kept pacing and was really on edge. In fact, it took hours for him to settle down, and it wasn't until later that she realized that this may be because the guy was still wandering around outside the building or something. We will never be sure what happened to that man or what he wanted. I can't imagine it was anything that wouldn't have ended in my friend's death, but since then, Indy has only had that reaction to one other person, who my friend is pretty sure was stalking her. The dog's reaction only confirming it for her. Honestly, I don't want to imagine what would have happened if Indy hadn't sensed that man somehow that night. Because the way he was running, it certainly sounds like he was trying to grab her. I work at a performing arts theatre. The building is city-owned, but the city hired a contract company to run the place, including technicians, managers, box office employees, and we bring on volunteers to man the concessions and hand out programs during a show. It's a small 500-seat theatre, flanked on either side by the community centre and public library. And because of this, it's a very community-orientated theatre, with around 80% of our clients returning annually to put their shows on. We have a lot of youth theatre, dance companies, and school bands perform here, so many of our shows are just made up of kids, ranging from as little as 3 or 4 to all the way to 17. But take note of this too. Now, for some background about me, I grew up in this theatre because my mum was the building manager for many years. So, me and my twin sister would always be around after school, sitting in the lobby doing homework or cartwheeling and somersaulting around, just having fun while my mum wrapped up her work. When she left, she trained the new manager, a young mid-20s woman called Diana, and they became friends. Some years later, I started volunteering with a local youth theatre group who performed at the theatre. I was a stagehand and would run out during blackouts to change the set and the props in between scenes during a show. Eventually, I was their stage manager, a paid position, but left them after they neglected to pay me in a timely manner. After that, I was a gymnastics coach for little kids, but grew tired of it quickly and started looking for another job. By now, I was 16 and a junior in high school. For all 3 years of high school, I was helping with the annual musical, put on by the choir and drama department, so I would be at the theatre helping with that once a year and whatnot. The choir teacher was actually a real creep too, but that isn't my story to tell. So as a junior preparing for college, I was starting to think about my interests and what I might want to do for college. I was really into art at the time, and because of all my experience, I was also interested in the backstage behind-the-scenes aspect of theatre. After quitting the gymnastics gig, my dad was really on my ass to get a job, so I headed to the theatre and asked to see a technical director. But the technical director, his name was Dave, was in charge of overseeing everything tech-related. Sound, lights, meeting with clients to help coordinate and plan their shows with the equipment we have. Like I said, it's a small theatre, so there are only 3 technicians on staff. The sound guy, Mark, the lighting woman, Sarah, and Dave, who was a lighting guy but knew everything about everything to be the director. So anyway, I go in to talk to Dave about a possible job. Now, I grew up in this theatre. My mum hired these guys when she was actually the manager of the theatre, and they all knew who I was, both from when I was little and when I would come in with the theatre group in my high school for shows. He was a really friendly, charismatic guy with a funny sense of humour, and I asked if he was hiring technicians, and he said, sure, we could use an extra hand, basically see you Monday. And he didn't even ask for a resume or anything. This made sense, though, to me because, he knew me and he knew my work ethic and probably hired me as a favour to my mum. Who knows? When I started, I met Mark and Sarah was really nice. About 30 years old, a little reserved, but she definitely meant business, so it was only a tad intimidating to a 16-year-old me. Mark was late 20s, was very quirky and quiet, sort of a goth type, I think. He was a smaller dude too, bald and had tattoos, but nice enough. He and Dave, who was really tall and lankier, had been best friends since high school too, and they were both very clearly sort of social outcasts and had definitely dabbled in punk and goth phases. I thought that they were really cool, in fact, as at this point in my life, I had just sort of exited a wannabe emo phase, but still dressed in kind of quirky clothing and dyed my hair outlandish colours and whatnot. So they brought me on and began training me with the basics of theatre tech work. Basics on both the sound and light boards, the rail which brings scenery and backdrops in and out, and general procedures. I took to it all as well as you would probably expect, and really enjoyed the job, helping everyone out with random things. It was fun, and I got along well with everyone, and the schedule was pretty lenient, so I was able to prioritise my education. I was super interested in the lighting and didn't click at all with the sound stuff, so I did a lot of one-on-one training with Dave on the light board. Sometimes I'd arrive and the two of us would talk about ourselves, philosophy, our hopes and dreams, you name it, for over an hour sometimes before we actually got to any work. He'd always say stuff like that I was very mature for my age, good head on my shoulders, and all that sort of thing. The stuff that, according to my therapist, due to issues with my dad that low-key screwed me up, I subconsciously craved to hear from an adult male. It was nothing creepy at all is what I'm getting at, and I want to stress that. There were no weird vibes from him or Mark, who was just quirky but not creepy. I never felt the slightest bit uncomfortable with either of them. So, fast forward about a year and a half or so, and I think I was 17 by then, almost 18. By now, me, Sarah, Dave and Mark had become really close, in fact, almost like family close, and we all definitely had respect for each other as human beings and cared no small amount about each other. It was really great, and I felt so blessed to work with such wonderful people. One day, we were all at the theatre on the maintenance shift, just cleaning and putting things back, restoring the lighting back to our general plot, and all of that sort of thing. We all exit the back door together, Dave and Mark heading to Dave's car as they live right next to each other, and I remember Mark saying something like, "See you guys Thursday. Totally normal, no red flags." Thursday rolls around and Mark isn't there. We asked Dave what's going on because, well, he's Mark's boss and he's also his best friend, so he should definitely know. And he sort of avoids the question. We noticed that too, and the whole day, Dave is acting just really tense, on edge, and is definitely really worried about something. Sarah and I avoid the subject as Dave clearly doesn't want to talk about whatever's going on, and I don't remember if this went on for a while or just that one shift without Mark, but one day, I'm lounging around at home and get a call from my boss. Now, this wasn't the theatre manager, but the next level up, the boss's boss. Her name was Joy, and I've known her from since I was a kid too, but since I started working there, she's not exactly in contact with the individual employees, so this was definitely pretty abnormal. And what she told me on the phone was shocking and also really confusing. She said that Mark had been fired indefinitely and Dave was on paid leave until she could get more information. She said that Sarah and I will be running the theatre for the summer mostly by ourselves. She tells me that she can't give me any information regarding Mark and Dave and she's really sorry. I immediately call my mum and she isn't surprised when I tell her about Joy's call and sounds almost sad and apprehensive. I ask if she knows what's going on, and she says that she does, but like Joy, isn't allowed to disclose any information, and she's sorry too. Now, my mum and I are very close, so this makes me feel a little betrayed and honestly, pretty nervous. When I get to work for the next shift too, the atmosphere is just heavy as anything, and Sarah and I, who were close enough, but weren't as bonded as we both were with Mark and Dave, talk amongst ourselves about what's going on. And we honestly can't figure it out. We work like this through the entire summer too, totally clueless, and while this experience has made us closer, we were both worried about our friends, unable to obtain any information and strongly advised against contacting either of them. By the end of the summer, we settled on a tentative explanation, like perhaps Mark stole some of the theatre's equipment and Dave knew about it or something. That would explain Mark's immediate termination and less abrupt leave that Dave was put on. We didn't want to believe it, but it was the only thing that seemed to make sense. Finally, after being left in the dark for months, Diana comes into the booth and says that she needs to talk to us about Mark and Dave. And because she and my mum are friends, I'm pretty close with her too, and the look she gives me when she sees me is one of pity, and she's clearly very disturbed. And then she sits down and tells us what happened. At the beginning of summer, the police were aware of somebody in the town downloading child pornography. They tracked down the computer it was downloaded to, and it was Mark's computer. After thoroughly examining his hard drives too, they unearthed dozens of videos that seemed to have been filmed in our theatre. The videos were taken from the corner of the catwalks, a stretch of platform above the front of the stage that holds our front of house lights. To get there, you go up into this alcove room, climb up a ladder to a platform, and then up another ladder. It's so dark up there with the lights out that it's pretty much impossible to see the top clearly when you're in the alcove room on the side of the stage. This means that if no one is looking, someone could potentially stand up there, very still and quiet, and not be noticed at all. Many theatre and dance companies use the alcove for quick changes, when they need to change their costume really quickly in order to get back out on stage fast, and wouldn't have time to run all the way back to the dressing rooms and whatnot. And the videos depicted young girls from one of our local return-every-year dance companies, dressing and undressing, though one of them got totally naked apparently. The girls range from maybe 10 to 18, and in order to verify any identity so that parents and dance company would be contacted, the police had Diana watch every single one of those videos. At this point, as she was telling Sarah and I the story, she looked visibly sick, and I was just in shock and I was nauseous. But she continues. In one of the videos, you can see the arm of a person holding the camera. Diana identified the arm as Dave's due to his distinctive tattoo. And so what ended up happening is that Mark was automatically fired because, well, downloading child pornography is a felony. However, filming girls dressing and undressing, apparently, while creepy and disturbing, is technically not a felony, so they put Dave on leave pending more investigation. He was eventually also fired, and amidst the child pornography and the videos from the theatre, the police also found many homemade videos involving Dave and his girlfriend, and Mark, doing some allegedly really disgusting stuff. But no one's been willing to elaborate on this, and I'm not exactly sure, and I don't even know if I really want to know. But after hearing all of this, I am definitely not okay. I'm shocked, and I feel sick, and I feel betrayed. I love these men like family, and they honestly had my complete trust. I admired them, I was a child. I couldn't help wondering over and over again in the months to come what the real reason Dave hired me was too. Everyone who knows the story too tells me not to think about it, that it probably really was a favour to my mum, but I was a child, same as those girls, and while neither did anything creepy to me, I can't help getting sick just thinking about if they had thought about it. Now, you may be wondering how these two creeps got hired in the first place, right? For both of them, this was actually their first offense. And my company does all the appropriate background checks and all that, but since neither of them had a record of anything, their checks actually came back clean and they were both hired. In the aftermath, Sarah and I stuck together, and she was eventually promoted to Dave's position as technical director and production manager, and I took her position as the lighting technician, after a solid stressful crash course and sort of being thrown into it, sink or swim style, since my training had never been prioritized. We hired a few temporary sound guys to keep us going, and we now have two fairly permanent sound guys who are both really great. Sarah and I are actually really close now too. I mean, after going through something like that with someone and working together with them to save an entire theatre, you get to be pretty good friends. Our sound guys know the gist of the story too, and give both Sarah and I the respect that we earned through that. I still love the job, and in a strange way, I guess Sarah and I kind of benefited from the situation in the end. But Dave and Mark were in court for almost a year, and eventually they both got sentenced with prison time, but now, 2.5 or so years later, both of them are out. And not long ago, Diana told us that she actually ran into Dave, pulled up next to him in a gas station parking lot. She apparently froze up, and when she could breathe again, just left immediately. She says that he no longer drives his distinctive old truck, so I have no idea who to look for to avoid. But no one has seen Mark though, and I'm terrified of running into one of them, to be honest, to the point where I don't care to go to my favourite coffee shop in town because I know that they both frequented it. Megan's actually lists their address as the same, so I just try to avoid that street that they live on at all costs. I honestly don't know what I'd do if I encountered one of them, and if I would just get angry or punch one of them, run away from them, or just freeze in shock. But I sure do hope that I never see Dave and Mark ever again.